The water pressure at 35,876 feet should have crushed me instantly. But as I sat inside the titanium sphere of my submersible, staring at the depth gauge, I realized something was wrong. The numbers had stopped climbing 3 minutes ago, frozen at exactly 35,876 feet, but I could still feel us descending. The mechanical hum of the descent winch continued its steady rhythm, and through the reinforced viewport the darkness outside grew thicker, more absolute. I tapped the gauge twice, then 3 times. The needle did not move. That was when I heard it, a sound that should not exist 7 miles beneath the Pacific Ocean, a sound like someone gently tapping on the outside of my viewport. 3 taps. Pause. 3 more taps. My name is Kyle. I am 34 years old, and I need to tell you what I found at the bottom of the Mariana Trench before they come for me. Before we go any further, I want you to do something for me. If this story makes your heart race, if it makes you question what really exists in the unexplored depths of our oceans, leave a comment below telling me what you think I found down there. Your theories might be closer to the truth than you realize. And if you are fascinated by true deep-sea mysteries and unexplained phenomena, make sure you are subscribed because what I am about to share with you has never been told before. 6 months ago, I was living what most people would call a dream life. I worked as a deep-sea engineer for Oceanic Horizons, a private research company funded by tech billionaires with more money than sense, and an obsession with being the first to discover something, anything, that would put their names in history books. My job was simple on paper: maintain and operate deep-sea submersibles, collect geological samples, and document marine life at depths where sunlight had never reached. I had completed 47 successful dives in my 5 years with the company. 47 times I had descended into the crushing darkness and returned safely. I was good at my job. I was careful. I followed every protocol, checked every system twice, and never took unnecessary risks. But dive number 48 was different from the start. It began with a call at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in March. I was asleep in my apartment in Seattle when my phone lit up with a message from Dr. Richard Vance, the head of our research division. The message was brief and strange. It read, "Emergency dive, Mariana Trench, target depth, maximum possible, departure in 6 hours. Do not discuss with anyone. Bonus, $500,000. $500,000 for a single dive." I sat up in bed, reading the message 3 more times. In 5 years, the largest bonus I had ever received was $15,000 for a particularly difficult salvage operation. This was different. This was the kind of money that made you ignore the voice in your head telling you something was wrong. I called Vance immediately. He answered on the first ring as if he had been waiting. "Kyle," he said, his voice tight with an emotion I could not identify. "I know this is unusual. I know you have questions. I need you to trust me. Get to the airport. I will explain everything on the plane." "What are we looking for?" I asked. There was a pause, long enough that I thought the connection had dropped. Then Vance said something that should have made me hang up and block his number. "We are not looking for something," he said. "We are going back for something." "Back?" I said. "We have never sent a manned submersible to maximum depth in the Mariana Trench. What do you mean back?" "6 hours, Kyle. Do not be late." He hung up. I should have stayed in bed. I should have ignored the message and gone back to sleep. But that number, $500,000, kept flashing in my mind. That was enough money to pay off my mother's medical bills, enough to finally buy the house I had been saving for, enough to change my life. So I packed my gear, drove to the airport, and boarded a private jet that took off at 5:30 a.m. with only 4 passengers. Me, Dr. Vance, a marine biologist named Dr. Ellen Briggs, and a man in a black suit who never introduced himself and spent the entire flight typing on a laptop. We flew for 11 hours, landing on a small private airstrip on Guam. From there, a helicopter took us to a research vessel called the Abyssal Star, anchored 200 miles east of the Mariana Islands. The ship was smaller than the vessels I was used to working on, with a crew of only 12 people. Everyone moved with quiet efficiency, speaking in low voices, avoiding eye contact. The atmosphere felt wrong, like everyone on board was holding their breath, waiting for something terrible to happen. Vance finally sat me down in the briefing room at 11:00 p.m. that night. Dr. Briggs was there too, looking exhausted and pale. The man in the black suit stood in the corner, watching us with cold, unblinking eyes. "Kyle," Vance began, spreading a map across the table. It showed the Mariana Trench with a red circle marked at the deepest point, Challenger Deep. "What I am about to tell you is classified. You have signed an NDA. If you break it, you will face legal consequences that will destroy your life. Do you understand?" I nodded. "3 weeks ago," Vance continued, "we sent an unmanned submersible to the bottom of Challenger Deep. It was equipped with the most advanced cameras and sensors ever built. The dive was successful. The submersible reached a depth of 36,070 feet, collected samples, and began its ascent." He paused, his hands trembling slightly as he pulled up a video file on a laptop. But before it surfaced, it recorded something. He turned the laptop toward me and pressed play. The screen showed darkness at first, absolute and complete. Then the submersible's lights flickered on, illuminating a barren seabed of pale gray mud. The timestamp in the corner read 35,994 feet. The camera panned slowly across the landscape, showing nothing but emptiness. Then, at exactly 42 seconds into the footage, something appeared at the edge of the light. It looked like a structure. Not a natural formation, not a rock or a coral reef, but a structure. Smooth surfaces, right angles. It was partially buried in the sediment, but I could clearly see what looked like a doorway, a rectangular opening that descended into darkness. "What is that?" I whispered. "We do not know," Vance said, "but that is not the strangest part." He fast-forwarded the video. The submersible had moved closer to the structure, its lights illuminating more details. The walls appeared to be made of some kind of stone, covered in symbols or markings that did not match any known language. The camera zoomed in on the doorway. For a moment, there was nothing but darkness beyond it. Then something moved. It was subtle, just a flicker at the edge of the frame, like a shadow passing through the light. The submersible's sensors immediately began malfunctioning. The depth gauge started spinning wildly. The temperature readings dropped from 34 degrees Fahrenheit to -12 degrees in less than 3 seconds, which was impossible at that depth and pressure. Then the audio feed, which should have been silent except for the mechanical sounds of the submersible, picked up something else. A voice. It was distorted, barely audible, but it was definitely a human voice, and it was speaking English. "Come back," it said. "Come back and see." The video ended abruptly as the submersible lost power and began an emergency ascent. It surfaced 6 hours later, but by then, all of its data storage had been corrupted except for that one video file. I sat in silence, staring at the frozen final frame on the screen. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what I had just seen. "This is fake," I finally said. "This has to be some kind of hoax." "We thought so too," Dr. Briggs said quietly, "until we sent a second submersible down. It recorded the exact same thing, same structure, same voice, and then it never came back." My blood ran cold. "You lost a submersible." "We lost 2, Vance said. "The second one reached the structure and entered the doorway. We received one final transmission before all contact was lost. Just 2 words, repeated over and over." He did not need to tell me what the words were. I already knew. "Come back." I stood up from the table, my legs shaking. "I am not doing this. I am not going down there. This is insane." The man in the black suit finally spoke. His voice was cold and flat, without emotion. "You already signed the contract, Kyle. You took the advance payment. $50,000 was deposited into your account 3 hours ago. If you refuse to complete the dive, you will be sued for breach of contract. You will lose everything, your home, your savings, your career, and you will face criminal charges for violating the NDA you signed. I looked at Vance. You cannot be serious. I am sorry, Kyle, Vance said, and he actually looked like he meant it. But we need someone down there. We need to know what that structure is. We need to understand what happened to our equipment. You are the best pilot we have. You are the only one who can do this. Then why not send one of you? I said, gesturing at the man in the black suit. The man smiled, and it was the most unsettling thing I had ever seen. Because I have already been down there, Kyle, and I came back different. We need someone who has not been touched by it yet, someone pure. I wanted to ask what he meant by that, but something in his eyes stopped me. There was a wrongness there, like looking at someone wearing a mask of their own face. That night I did not sleep. I stood on the deck of the Abyssal Star, staring out at the black water, trying to convince myself to get on the helicopter in the morning and leave. But every time I thought about running, I thought about the lawsuit, about losing everything I had worked for, about my mother's medical bills that I would never be able to pay. They had me trapped. They knew it, and I knew it. At 3:15 a.m., Dr. Briggs found me on the deck. She was holding 2 cups of coffee. "You are thinking about leaving," she said, handing me one of the cups. "I would be an idiot not to." She nodded. "I have been on 17 deep-sea expeditions. I have seen things that science cannot explain. Bioluminescent creatures that glow with colors that should not exist. Sounds recorded at depths where nothing should be able to produce sound. The ocean is full of mysteries, Kyle. Most of them are beautiful. Some of them are terrifying. But this," she trailed off, shaking her head, "this is different. This is something we were never meant to find." "Then why are you here?" I asked. She smiled sadly. "Because I need to know. Even if it kills me, I need to know what is down there. Do you understand that feeling?" I did. I hated that I did, but I understood completely. There was a part of me, a small part, that was curious. That wanted to see the structure with my own eyes. That wanted to know what was inside that doorway. "What do you think it is?" I asked. Dr. Briggs stared out at the water for a long moment. "I think it is old, older than anything we have ever discovered. I think it was built by something that lived on this planet before us, or maybe something that came from somewhere else. I think whatever built it wanted to hide from something, and I think they went as deep as they possibly could to get away from it." "Get away from what?" She turned to look at me, and her eyes were full of fear. "The light, Kyle. I think they were running from the light." The dive was scheduled for 6:00 a.m. I spent the hours before dawn running diagnostics on the submersible, checking every system, every seal, every backup power supply. The submersible was called the Orpheus, a titanium sphere 7 feet in diameter, designed to withstand pressures of up to 40,000 feet. It had life support for 96 hours, emergency ballast systems, and redundant communication arrays. It was the safest deep-sea vehicle ever built. But as I climbed inside at 5:45 a.m., strapping myself into the pilot seat, I could not shake the feeling that I was climbing into a coffin. Vance was there to see me off. He handed me a small device about the size of a thumb drive. "This is a recording device," he said. "It is completely isolated from the Orpheus's main systems. Whatever you see down there, whatever you find, this will record it. Even if everything else fails, this will survive. Keep it with you at all times." I clipped the device to my belt. "You really think the main systems are going to fail?" "I hope not," Vance said. "But based on what happened to the other submersibles, we need to be prepared for anything." "Great," I muttered. "That makes me feel so much better." Vance put his hand on my shoulder. "Kyle, listen to me. If you feel like something is wrong, if your instincts are telling you to abort, do it. Drop the ballast and come back up. Do not take any unnecessary risks. We need the data, but we need you alive more." I wanted to believe him, but the look in his eyes told me he was lying. They needed the data more than they needed me. I was expendable. The mission was not. The descent began at exactly 6:00 a.m. The crane lowered the Orpheus into the water, and I felt the familiar lurch as the sphere disconnected from the cable and began its slow sink into the abyss. For the first hour, everything was routine. Sunlight filtered through the water, turning it a deep blue. Schools of fish darted past the viewport. I ran through my checklist, monitoring depth, pressure, oxygen levels, battery charge. Everything was nominal. At 1,000 feet, the water turned darker. The blue faded to a deep purple. The temperature inside the sphere dropped a few degrees, and I adjusted the internal heater to compensate. At 3,000 feet, all traces of sunlight disappeared. I switched on the external lights, and the water around me came alive with bioluminescent creatures, jellyfish trailing tentacles of light, squid with glowing eyes that watched me as I passed, tiny organisms that sparkled like stars. It was beautiful, peaceful. I had seen this 100 times before, but it never got old. At 6,000 feet, the creatures started to look stranger, less like anything I recognized. There were fish with teeth too large for their mouths, things that looked like they were made of glass, creatures with too many eyes or no eyes at all. Down here, evolution had taken different paths, created things that existed nowhere else on Earth. At 13,000 feet, the creatures stopped appearing. The water became empty, devoid of life. There was only darkness and the steady hum of the Orpheus's descent motors. This was the twilight zone, the place where almost nothing could survive. The pressure was too great. The cold was too intense. There was no food, no light, no reason for anything to exist here. And yet, as I descended deeper, I could not shake the feeling that something was watching me. At 20,000 feet, I tried to contact the surface. The radio crackled with static, but I could hear Vance's voice, faint and distorted. "Orpheus, this is Abyssal Star. We are reading you at 20,147 feet. All systems nominal. Continue descent." "Acknowledged," I said. "Continuing descent. Everything looks good down here." "Copy that. Be advised, we are monitoring a slight fluctuation in your power systems. Nothing critical, but keep an eye on it." "Understood." The radio cut out with a burst of static. I was not surprised. At these depths, communication became unreliable. The water pressure interfered with radio waves, and the sheer distance made it difficult to maintain a clear signal. I would be on my own for most of the dive. At 25,000 feet, I entered what we called the Hadal Zone, the deepest part of the ocean. Only a handful of people had ever been this deep. The pressure outside the Orpheus was now over 11,000 pounds per square inch. If the hull failed, I would be crushed so quickly that my brain would not even have time to register it. I tried not to think about that. At 29,000 feet, the temperature inside the sphere began to drop. I turned up the internal heater, but the cold seemed to seep through the titanium walls, settling into my bones. I checked the external temperature sensor. It read -2 degrees Fahrenheit, which was impossible. The water at this depth should be around 34 degrees. I tapped the sensor. The reading did not change. At 32,000 feet, I saw the first flicker of something in the darkness. It was there and gone so quickly that I thought I had imagined it, a pale shape moving just beyond the reach of my lights. I adjusted the camera angle, panning the lights across the empty water. There was nothing, just darkness. But I could have sworn I saw something. At 33,000 feet, I saw it again. This time it was closer, just at the edge of my light. It looked like fabric, white fabric floating in the water. I focused the camera on it, zooming in. It was definitely fabric, and it was moving against the current as if something was wearing it. My heart started pounding. I reached for the radio, but all I got was static. I was too deep now. The surface could not hear me. The fabric drifted closer. I could see more details now. It was not just fabric, it was a diving suit. An old-fashioned canvas diving suit, the kind used in the early 1900s. Heavy material, brass fittings. a helmet with a circular faceplate. And there was someone inside it. I could see the outline of a body, the shape of arms and legs, but the suit was moving in a way that made no sense. The arms were drifting upward, reaching toward me, but there was no current strong enough to make them move like that. It was as if whoever was inside was intentionally reaching out. I grabbed the controls and fired the thrusters, moving the Orpheus away from the figure. The suit followed. It did not swim. It did not use any kind of propulsion. It just glided through the water, matching my speed exactly, always staying at the edge of my lights. "This is not real," I said out loud, trying to convince myself. "This is just some kind of hallucination. The pressure is affecting my brain. This is not real." But it felt real. It looked real. And as I watched, the figure raised one hand and pointed downward, toward the depths below. Then it was gone. It did not swim away. It did not fade into the darkness. It just vanished as if it had never been there at all. I sat in the Orpheus, my hands shaking, trying to process what I had just seen. Part of me wanted to abort the dive, to drop the ballast and rocket back to the surface. But another part of me, the curious part, the part that Dr. Briggs had been talking about, wanted to keep going, wanted to see what was down there. I checked my depth gauge, 33,412 feet. I was almost there, just another 2,500 feet to the bottom. I continued the descent. At 35,000 feet, the radio stopped working entirely. I tried to contact the surface, but all I got was static. This was normal at extreme depths, I reminded myself. The water pressure interfered with radio waves. I had expected it, but it still made my hands shake as I gripped the controls. At 35,500 feet, I saw more figures, dozens of them floating in the water around me, all wearing the same old-fashioned diving suits, all reaching toward me, all pointing downward. I tried to ignore them, tried to focus on my instruments, but they were everywhere, surrounding the Orpheus, pressing their hands against the viewport. And then I realized something that made my blood run cold. I could see inside their helmets, through the glass faceplates, and there was nothing there. No faces, no bones, just empty darkness. At 35,876 feet, the depth gauge froze. This is where my story began. The numbers stopped climbing. The needle locked in place. But I could feel the Orpheus still descending, the gentle downward pull of gravity, the increasing pressure against the hull. And then I heard the tapping. 3 taps on the viewport. Pause, 3 more taps. I aimed the external lights at the source of the sound. There was nothing there, just water and darkness and those empty suits floating in the distance. The taps came again, louder this time, more insistent, and I realized they were not random. They were deliberate. Someone or something was trying to communicate. Before you continue listening, I need to ask you something. If you are finding this story as unsettling as I found living through it, do me a favor and hit that like button. It lets me know you are engaged with these true encounters from the deep. And if you want to hear what happened next, if you want to know what I found at the bottom of the Mariana Trench, make sure you are subscribed with notifications on. Because what I am about to tell you will change the way you think about the ocean forever. "Hello," I said, my voice barely a whisper. I do not know why I spoke. There was no one to hear me. But the tapping stopped immediately, as if whatever was out there had been waiting for me to respond. The Orpheus's lights flickered once, twice, and then went out completely. I was plunged into absolute darkness. Not the darkness of a room at night, where your eyes adjust and you can make out shapes. This was complete, total absence of light. The kind of darkness that presses against your eyes, that makes you question if you are even awake. I fumbled for the emergency light switch, my hands slapping against the control panel, trying to remember its location. My training kicked in. Top right corner, red button. I found it and pressed. The backup lights came on, dim and red, casting everything in a crimson glow. And that was when I saw the seabed. The Orpheus had landed. I had not felt the impact, which was strange. The landing should have been jarring, even with the sphere's suspension systems. But we were definitely on the bottom. Through the viewport, I could see pale gray mud stretching out in all directions, disturbed only by small ripples that seemed to move in patterns, as if something beneath the sediment was breathing. And there, about 50 feet ahead of me, illuminated by my red emergency lights, was the structure. It was exactly as it had appeared in the video Vance had shown me, but seeing it in person was completely different. It was massive, much larger than I had realized from the footage. The doorway alone was at least 15 feet tall and 10 feet wide. The walls were smooth, almost polished, made of some kind of dark stone that reflected the red light in strange ways, creating patterns that seemed to shift and move when I was not looking directly at them. The symbols carved into the surface were clearer now. They were not random. They were organized, arranged in neat rows and columns like text, but they did not match any language I had ever seen. Some of the symbols looked almost familiar, like corrupted versions of letters from various alphabets, but twisted and wrong in ways I could not quite articulate. And the doorway was open, and there was light coming from inside. Not artificial light, not the glow of any technology I recognized. This was something else, a pale, sickly green luminescence that pulsed slowly, rhythmically, like a heartbeat. Each pulse sent ripples of light across the structure's surface, making the symbols seem to writhe and squirm. I sat in the Orpheus, frozen, unable to move. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to ascend, to drop the ballast and rocket back to the surface. But I could not look away from that light. It was hypnotic, drawing me in. And then I saw the figures. They were standing in the doorway, or at least I think they were standing. The pulsing light made it hard to see clearly, but I could make out shapes. Human shapes. 5 or 6 of them, wearing those same canvas diving suits, just standing there in the entrance to the structure, facing me. I watched them for what felt like hours but was probably only a few minutes. They did not move. They just stood there, silent and still, like statues. Then slowly, one of them raised an arm and pointed directly at the Orpheus, directly at me. My radio crackled to life, but it was not Vance's voice that came through. It was the voice from the video, distorted and layered, as if a dozen people were speaking in unison. "Welcome back, Kyle." It knew my name. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the controls. "Who are you?" I managed to say. "We have been waiting for you." "Waiting for me? I have never been here before." The voice laughed, a sound like wind through a graveyard, like dead leaves scraping across stone. "Yes, you have. You just do not remember yet, but you will. Soon you will remember everything." "I do not understand," I said. "What are you talking about?" "The descent, Kyle, the great descent. When the light became too much. When the surface burned. When we fled to the depths to escape the sun. You were there. You were one of us." I grabbed the ballast release lever, ready to pull it and begin my ascent. But before I could, the Orpheus lurched forward. Not violently, but smoothly, as if something was pulling us across the seabed toward the structure. I checked the motors, they were off. I checked the thrusters, inactive. We should not be moving. But we were. The Orpheus slid across the mud, leaving a deep trail behind us, pulled by some invisible force toward the doorway. The figures were still standing there, watching us approach. As we got closer, I could see more details. The suits they wore were in terrible condition. The canvas was rotted and torn in places, exposing what should have been flesh beneath. But there was nothing there, just more darkness. The brass fittings were corroded, covered in barnacles and strange growths that looked like they were pulsing with their own internal light. And the helmets, those circular glass faceplates, were cracked and clouded, but I could still see through them. Empty, completely empty. Nothing inside but that pulsing green light. The Orpheus stopped moving when we were 10 feet from the doorway. The figures had not moved. They just stood there, pointing at me with skeletal arms that should not have been able to support themselves. The voice came through the radio again, louder now, more insistent. "Exit your vessel, Kyle. Come inside. We have so much to show you." "I am not opening that hatch," I said. "The pressure would kill me instantly." "The pressure is an illusion. The depth is an illusion. Distance and time and space, all illusions. There is only the dark, Kyle, the eternal dark, and you belong here with us." "I am leaving," I said, pulling the ballast release lever as hard as I could. There was a mechanical clunk as the weights dropped away from the Orpheus. The sphere should have immediately begun rising, floating back toward the surface. But nothing happened. We stayed exactly where we were, held in place by whatever force had pulled us to the structure. "You cannot leave," the voice said, and I could hear amusement in it. "You have been chosen, just like the others, just like everyone who has descended too deep and seen what lies beneath." "What others?" I demanded. "Who else has been here?" "The ones who built this structure, the ones who descended to escape the light, the ones who found the truth at the bottom of the world and could never return. They are with us now. They are part of us, and soon you will be too." The figures began to move. They walked forward, toward the Orpheus, their movements jerky and unnatural, like puppets controlled by an amateur puppeteer. I could hear their footsteps through the hull, heavy thuds against the seabed, even though they should not have been able to make any sound at all. When they reached the viewport, they pressed their empty helmets against the glass. Up close, I could see deeper into the darkness inside them. There were things in there, not faces, not anything recognizable, but there were shapes writhing and twisting made of shadow and that pulsing green light. And they had eyes, dozens of eyes scattered throughout the darkness, all different sizes and shapes, all glowing with that same sick luminescence. And they were all looking at me. One of the figures raised its hand and traced a symbol on the viewport, the same symbol that appeared on the structure. Where its finger touched the glass, frost formed instantly, spreading outward in intricate crystalline patterns. The temperature inside the Orpheus dropped so fast that my breath turned to fog. I could see it hanging in the air, thick and white, like smoke. I turned the heater to maximum, but it made no difference. Within seconds, ice was forming on the inside of the viewport, obscuring my vision. I could hear creaking sounds, metal contracting in the cold, and I realized with horror that the Orpheus was not designed to handle these temperatures. The hull integrity was compromised. If it got any colder, the seals could fail. The sphere could crack. I would die down here, crushed and frozen at the same time. "Let me go," I shouted. "I do not want to be here. I do not want any part of this." The voice on the radio laughed again, that awful sound that made my skin crawl. "Want is irrelevant. You were chosen the moment you agreed to descend, the moment you took their money, the moment you signed your name on that contract. You gave yourself to us, Kyle, and now we are simply collecting what belongs to us." "I did not know," I said, my voice breaking. "I did not know what this was. I thought it was just a research dive." "Ignorance is not innocence. You came to the deep willingly. You brought yourself to our door, and now the door is open and there is no going back." The ice on the viewport began to clear, melting away in seconds despite the freezing temperature. I did not understand how that was possible, but nothing about this situation made sense anymore. And when I could see clearly again, the figures were gone. The seabed was empty, but the doorway to the structure was still there, and the green light inside was brighter now, more intense, pulsing faster, like a heart racing with excitement. I checked my systems desperately, looking for anything I could use to escape. The ballast release had worked, the weights were gone, but something was holding us down. I tried the emergency thrusters, burning precious battery power to push us upward. The Orpheus shuddered and rose about 3 feet before slamming back down into the mud with a force that rattled my teeth. That was when I noticed the cables. They were thin, almost invisible in the red light of my emergency systems, but they were definitely there. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, attached to the top of the Orpheus, stretching upward into the darkness above me. They looked organic, like tendons or sinew, glistening with moisture that should not exist at this depth. And they were pulling tight, keeping the sphere anchored to the seabed. I traced them with my external lights, following them up and up until they disappeared into the water above. The beams of my lights could only penetrate about 50 feet in the murky water, but I could see something up there. Something massive. A shape blocking out even the faint bioluminescence of whatever lived in these depths. Something was up there, and it was descending toward me. The voice came again, softer now, almost gentle, like a parent speaking to a frightened child. Do not be afraid, Kyle. You are going to become something greater. You are going to see the truth of what lies beneath, the truth of where the lost things go, the truth of what humanity will become when the sun finally dies and the surface becomes uninhabitable. What truth? I whispered, unable to look away from the shape descending toward me. The truth that we are not the first, the truth that there have been others before us, civilizations that rose and fell, species that evolved and went extinct. And when their worlds ended, when the light became too much or the darkness too complete, they came here, to the deep, to the place where nothing can reach them, to the place where they could wait for the next cycle to begin. The shape was closer now. I could make out details, though my mind struggled to comprehend what I was seeing. It had tendrils, dozens of them, each one as thick as a ship's mast, covered in growths that looked like barnacles but moved and writhed like living things. The tendrils were connected to something central, something that might have been a body, or might have been a structure, or might have been something that existed in the space between those two concepts. It was alive, and it was ancient, and it had been waiting here in the deepest part of the ocean for longer than human civilization had existed. This is the truth, Kyle. This is what we found when we descended. This is what saved us from the burning light, and this is what will save you. The tendrils reached down and began wrapping around the Orpheus. I could feel them tightening, squeezing, testing the strength of the titanium hull. The sphere groaned under the pressure. Warning lights began flashing on my control panel. Hull integrity at 85%, 80%, 75%. I grabbed the emergency cutting torch from its mount on the wall. It was designed to cut through metal in case of a jammed hatch, burning at nearly 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit. I opened the small maintenance hatch in the top of the sphere, the one that provided access to the external cable attachment point. Cold water immediately began seeping in through the seal, just a thin stream, but enough to tell me that opening the hatch fully would be catastrophic. But I had no choice. I pushed the hatch open just wide enough to angle the torch through, aimed at the nearest cable. The flame burned white-hot. I pressed it against the cable, which was thicker than I had realized, nearly as thick as my arm. The heat should have cut through it instantly, but the cable resisted, smoking an acrid smell but not severing. I held the torch steady, feeling the heat radiating back into the sphere, sweat pouring down my face despite the freezing temperature. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the cable snapped. The sound was like a gunshot echoing through the water. The Orpheus lurched to one side. I grabbed another cable and began cutting. Then another. Then another. My hands were burning from the heat of the torch, blisters forming on my palms, but I did not stop. The shape above us reacted. The tendrils moved faster, more aggressively, reaching down toward the sphere. I could hear scraping sounds against the hull, like fingernails on metal, but louder, more intense. The radio exploded with sound, not words anymore, but screaming. A cacophony of voices overlapping, all of them screaming the same thing over and over. Stay, 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 stay. I cut through the last visible cable, and the Orpheus dropped back to the seabed with an impact that shattered the screen on one of my monitoring systems. Sparks flew from the control panel. The lights flickered, but we were free from the cables. I slammed the maintenance hatch shut, sealed it, and pulled the emergency ascent lever. This was the absolute last resort. A chemical reaction that would generate nitrogen gas and force it into ballast tanks, pushing us toward the surface faster than any motor could achieve. It was dangerous. The rapid ascent could cause the bends or structural damage, but staying here meant certain death. The Orpheus shot upward like a rocket. For a few seconds I thought I had made it. I thought I was going to survive. The depth gauge, which had been frozen at 35,876 feet, suddenly came to life, the numbers spinning backward. 35,000 feet, 34,000 feet, 33,000 feet. Then something wrapped around the sphere. A tendril, massive and cold, covered in those moving barnacles that I now realized were not barnacles at all, but eyes. Hundreds of tiny eyes, all focusing on me through the viewport. It squeezed and I heard the hull groan under the pressure. The viewport cracked, a single thin line appearing in the reinforced glass, spreading like a spider web. If the viewport shattered, I would die instantly. The pressure at this depth would crush me before I could even scream. The ascent slowed. The depth gauge stopped at 32,450 feet. The tendril was pulling us back down, dragging us toward the structure, toward that open doorway and the pulsing green light beyond. I grabbed the only weapon I had left, the emergency flare gun, designed to signal rescue teams if the submersible surfaced far from the retrieval vessel. It was loaded with 3 magnesium flares, each one designed to burn brightly enough to be visible for miles underwater. I opened the maintenance hatch again, ignoring the water that began pouring in, now faster than before. The seal was damaged from before. I had maybe 30 seconds before the pressure equalized and the sphere flooded completely. I aimed the flare gun through the hatch and fired directly into the tendril. The flare exploded on contact, burning at nearly 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit. The water around the impact point boiled instantly, creating a massive bubble of superheated steam. The tendril recoiled, the flesh where the flare had hit turning black and crispy, chunks of it flaking off and floating away into the darkness. The thing let out a sound. I felt it more than heard it, a low-frequency rumble that made my organs vibrate, that made my teeth chatter, that made blood trickle from my nose. It was a sound of pain, of rage, of something ancient and powerful being wounded by something as insignificant as me. And then it let go. The Orpheus rocketed toward the surface, the emergency ascent system pushing us upward at a speed that made my head spin. I slammed the maintenance hatch shut, but water had already filled the lower portion of the sphere. It sloshed around my feet, ice cold, slowly rising as more leaked in through the damaged seal. The depth gauge spun wildly, 30,000 feet, 25,000 feet, 20,000 feet. I was ascending too fast, way too fast. The pressure change could kill me. My blood could literally boil, my lungs could rupture. But staying below meant certain death, so I had no choice but to ride it out. At 15,000 feet, my vision started to blur. The pressure change was affecting my brain. I could feel it, a pounding in my skull, like someone was hitting me with a hammer from the inside. I tasted blood in my mouth. At 10,000 feet, I started seeing things. Hallucinations, I told myself. Just hallucinations from the rapid decompression, but they looked so real. Faces in the water outside the viewport. People I had known who had died. My father who had passed away when I was 12. An old girlfriend who had been killed in a car accident. They were all there, floating in the water, watching me ascend, their mouths moving but making no sound. At 5,000 feet, the emergency ascent system finally exhausted itself. The chemical reaction that had been pushing us upward sputtered and died, but we still had momentum. We were still rising, just slower now, coasting on inertia alone. At 1,000 feet, I could see sunlight filtering down through the water. Beautiful, golden, life-giving sunlight. I started laughing. I could not help it. I was going to make it. I was going to survive. At 500 feet, something grabbed me. Not physically, not with hands or tendrils, but I felt it in my mind. A presence, a consciousness that was not my own. It slithered into my thoughts like a worm burrowing into an apple, and it spoke, not with sound but with images and feelings and memories that were not mine. I saw the structure being built. I saw thousands of people in those old-fashioned diving suits working together, carrying stones, carving symbols, creating the doorway. I saw them descend into it, one by one disappearing into that green light. I saw cities on the surface burning, the sun too bright, the heat too intense. I saw humanity fleeing underground into caves, into the ocean. And I saw the thing at the bottom, the ancient thing that had been waiting, the thing that promised salvation in exchange for service, the thing that fed on fear and offered protection in return. I saw myself, hundreds of years ago, wearing one of those suits, descending into the deep, entering the structure, becoming one with that thing. I saw myself transformed, emptied out, filled with its purpose. And I understood. The voice had been telling the truth. I had been there before, not in this life but in another. I had made this descent before. I had been chosen before. And every time I came back, reborn, recycled, sent back to the surface to live another life, only to be called back to the deep when the time was right. This was not my first descent. It would not be my last. The Orpheus broke the surface at 11:47 a.m. The sun was blazing overhead. The sky was impossibly blue. I could see the abyssal star in the distance, a tiny speck on the horizon. I sat in the sphere, water up to my knees, staring at nothing, trying to process what I had seen, what I had learned, what I had become. My radio crackled, not the submersible's radio, that was dead, but my personal emergency transponder, the one clipped to my belt. Orpheus, this is Coast Guard vessel Patricia. We have you on radar. Are you in need of assistance? Coast Guard, where was the abyssal star? Yes, I said, my voice hoarse. Yes, I need assistance. My submersible is taking on water. Copy that, Orpheus. We are 3 miles from your position. ETA 15 minutes. Can you stay afloat that long? I think so. Roger that, hold tight. Help is on the way. The Coast Guard arrived 12 minutes later. They pulled me out of the Orpheus, wrapped me in thermal blankets and loaded me into a helicopter. I was shivering uncontrollably, my body in shock from the rapid pressure change, the cold, the fear. Where is the abyssal star? I asked the medic treating me. He looked confused. What vessel? The abyssal star, the research ship that deployed me. It should be around here somewhere. The medic exchanged glances with the pilot. Sir, we have not detected any research vessels in this area. You were the only thing on our radar. That is impossible, I said. They were right there. They were monitoring my dive. Sir, you need to calm down. You have been through a traumatic experience. Your memory might be confused. But I knew I was not confused. The abyssal star had been there. Dr. Vance, Dr. Briggs, the man in the black suit, they were all real. Weren't they? They flew me to a hospital in Guam. I spent 3 days there being treated for hypothermia, dehydration, and what the doctors called severe decompression sickness. They said I was lucky to be alive. The rapid ascent should have killed me. By all logic and medical science, I should be dead. But I was not. On the 4th day, 2 men in dark suits came to my hospital room. They were not the same man who had been on the plane, but they had the same energy, the same cold, unblinking eyes, the same sense that they knew something I did not. Kyle, one of them said, sitting in the chair next to my bed, we need to talk about what you saw down there. Who are you? I asked. That is not important. What is important is that you understand something. What you experienced at the bottom of the Mariana Trench is classified. You will not speak about it to anyone. You will not write about it. You will not post about it online. If you do, there will be consequences. What kind of consequences? The man smiled, but there was no warmth in it. The kind that make people disappear. I signed an NDA, I said. I know how this works. I will not talk. Good, the other man said. He placed a briefcase on my bed and opened it. Inside was $500,000 in cash. "This is the bonus you were promised. Consider it payment for your silence." I stared at the money. $500,000, the amount that had convinced me to take this insane dive in the first place. "Take it," the first man said. "Go home, live your life, forget about what you saw, and never ever go near the ocean again." They left without another word. I was released from the hospital the next day. I took the money and flew back to Seattle, and I tried to do what they said. I tried to forget. But I could not. Because the memories from that descent, the ones that the thing had shown me, were still there, getting stronger every day. I remembered building the structure. I remembered the descent. I remembered transforming into one of those empty suits. I remembered waiting at the bottom, watching for the next person to come, the next person to be chosen. And I realized something terrible. I did not escape, not really. The thing at the bottom had let me go. It had allowed me to return to the surface, but not out of mercy, out of purpose. I was sent back to tell the story, to plant the seed, to make others curious, because that is how it works. That is how it has always worked. Someone descends, someone sees, someone returns, and they tell people what they found. And eventually, someone else gets curious enough to go looking. And the cycle continues. 3 months passed. I did not sleep much during that time. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that doorway, that green light, those empty suits, and I dreamed about descending again, about going back down to the deepest place on Earth. The dreams felt less like dreams and more like memories, like I was remembering something that had not happened yet. I tried to ignore them. I tried to move on with my life. I used the money to pay off my mother's medical bills. I bought a small house in the suburbs. I got a job teaching marine engineering at a local community college. I did everything I could to create a normal life. But the ocean would not leave me alone. I started hearing it everywhere, not the sound of waves or seagulls or boats. I heard the deep ocean, that low-frequency hum that exists at the bottom of the world, the sound of pressure and darkness and things that should not be. I heard it in the shower, in my car, in the silence of my house at 3:00 a.m. when I could not sleep. And I started seeing things, glimpses of figures in old diving suits, standing at the end of my street, standing in my backyard, standing in my bedroom doorway when I woke up in the middle of the night. They never moved. They just stood there, watching me, pointing toward the west, toward the ocean. 2 weeks ago, I found something that confirmed what I already suspected. I was looking at satellite images of the Mariana Trench online, still trying to find some evidence of the structure, some proof that I had not imagined everything. And I found something. Not the structure itself, but something else, something worse. There were cables. Thousands of them stretching up from the deepest parts of the trench, reaching toward the surface. Thin lines, barely visible on the satellite images, but definitely there. And they were spreading, extending outward, reaching toward the major shipping lanes, toward underwater internet cables, toward the underwater pipelines that connected continents. The thing at the bottom was not staying down there. It was reaching up, expanding its influence, preparing for something. And I knew with absolute certainty that it was calling to people, not just me, but others, scientists, engineers, explorers, anyone with the means and the curiosity to descend. It was drawing them down one by one, adding them to its collection, growing stronger with each person who answered the call. Yesterday, I received a package at my house. No return address, no postage. Just my name written on brown paper in handwriting that looked old-fashioned, like it was from a different century. Inside was a single item, an old diving helmet, brass and canvas, covered in barnacles and that same strange growth I had seen on the suits at the bottom. The helmet was damaged, one side crushed inward, the glass faceplate cracked. And inside the helmet, scratched into the brass with something sharp, was a message. Welcome home, Kyle. Your work is just beginning. Return to us. Complete the cycle. Become what you were always meant to be. I stared at that message for hours, and I felt something inside me respond to it. A pull, a yearning, like a salmon swimming upstream to spawn, like a bird migrating south for winter, an instinct that transcended logic or reason. I was being called back. And the worst part, the part that terrifies me more than anything else, is that I want to go. Not the rational part of me, not the part that wants to live and be safe and have a normal life, but some deeper part, some ancient part that remembers building that structure, that remembers descending into the green light, that remembers becoming empty and eternal and part of something vast. That part of me wants to return to the deep. I am fighting it. Every day I wake up and I fight against that pull. I stay away from the ocean. I avoid looking at water. I have stopped teaching because half my lectures were about deep-sea exploration and it was making the pull stronger. But I do not know how much longer I can resist. Because I have started having new memories, not from the past but from the future. I see myself descending again. I see myself reaching the structure. I see myself walking through that doorway. I see myself transforming into one of those empty suits, standing at the threshold, waiting for the next person to descend. And in those memories I am happy, content, at peace in a way I have never been on the surface. Maybe that is the real horror. Not that the thing at the bottom wants to consume me, but that part of me wants to be consumed. Last night I booked a flight to Guam. I told myself I was just going to look, just going to see if the structure was still there, just going to prove to myself that it was all real. But I know the truth. I am going back, not to explore, not to study, but to return, to complete the cycle, to become what I was always meant to be. And when I descend this time, I will not be coming back. If you are listening to this, if you have made it this far through my story, I need you to understand something. The ocean is not what we think it is. It is not just water and fish and coral. It is deeper than that, older than that. And at the very bottom, in the places where no light reaches, there are things that have been waiting since before humanity existed. Things that remember when the world was different. Things that know what is coming. Things that are preparing for the next cycle, the next change, the next evolution. And they are calling to us, to all of us, whispering in frequencies we cannot hear, showing us images in dreams we do not remember, pulling us toward the depths one person at a time. Someday, maybe soon, maybe in 100 years, maybe in 1,000, the surface will become uninhabitable. The sun will become too bright or too dim. The climate will shift in ways we cannot survive. The air will become poison. And when that happens, humanity will have a choice. Die on the surface or descend to the deep. And the thing at the bottom will be waiting, patient, eternal, ready to transform us into something that can survive in the darkness, something that does not need light or air or warmth, something that can wait out the ages until the surface is habitable again. If you have found this recording, if you are listening to my story after I am gone, know this. I did not disappear. I did not die. I went home, back to the place I have always belonged, back to the deep. And if you ever feel that pull, if you ever hear that low-frequency hum, if you ever dream about descending into darkness, do not ignore it. Do not fight it. Because it is already too late. You have been chosen. And the only question left is how long you will resist before you accept what you are meant to become. My name is Kyle. I am 34 years old. I dove to the deepest place on earth and I found something terrifying. But the most terrifying thing was not what I found down there. It was realizing that it had been waiting for me, that it had always been waiting for me, that I had been there before and I would be there again, that the deep is not a place we go to. It is a place we return to. It is where we all came from, and it is where we will all go back. Welcome home.